Okay, good morning, Bangkok. Hello to everyone. Hope you are enjoying the conference and this beautiful city as much as I do. And of course, thanks to Chris, thanks to Alessio for the wonderful conference, for the wonderful invitation, for the work you are doing for the world of running. You're doing a great job, absolutely. I have to apologize maybe a little bit that I'm an academic. Sorry for that. But academics are said to maybe know a lot of a few things, whereas you, being practitioners in the field, are said to know a little of many things. Up to you to decide who is in the best position. I'm affiliated to the KU Leuven. It's a university in Belgium, in Leuven, as a professor in the fields of sport management and sport sociology. I still do like it, but I also like to participate in running as well. But I have to admit that I switched from long-distance running towards triathlon. Again, my apologies. But maybe it's a first lesson for you. When we do studies among distance runners, but also among triathlon athletes, it seems that the latter have begun their career being it as a lead sporter or a non-competitive participant, that they switched from running towards triathlon for medical reasons, for social reasons, etc. So maybe keep that in mind already. Making cities fit for runners. Well, here is the outline. I will guide you a little bit. Why should we talk about cities? Why are they important for the world of running? What about running? Its developments, its popularity? Well, as I said, I'm a professor, and professors have to deal with numbers. So I will present you quite a lot of numbers. Who are the runners today? What do they prefer? And what about the running organizers? What is the role of public governments? And I will end with running events and, most of all, their public value. So first of all, why cities? The city, public places and public spheres in general, maybe not always or not necessarily are a friendly setting for sports people. You're not allowed to walk or to bike or to make use of other non-motorized or motorized instruments, or even activities, physical activities that are more close to sports, skating, using as a step, inline skating, not allowed, but also swimming when it is possible, or scuba diving, ice skating, fishing, sports fishing, not allowed, and also, yes, football and a lot of team sports, basketball and volleyball, for instance, and even running. So it seems that the city is not a welcome place or very much welcoming people that do like running. Sport sometimes is not allowed. Imagine, here are some pictures from my country, and maybe it's not a real advertisement for the country, but anyway, imagine to be in Brussels one day and that you want to visit the city while running or cycling. Well, you have to come about some obstacles like this. Many obstacles for cyclists and runners. So is the city really a place to be for sports people? By the way, the picture on the bottom at the left is taken in front of the Institution for Safety in Traffic. So why cities? Well, as we all know, in the industrialized cities, even more than 75% of the people live in these urbanized settings. And in non-industrialized countries, 50% or even more. So this might be an opportunity. Rolly, go on with the Congo River Marathon. It will be a success in Kinshasa within 10 years, maybe. The political impact of cities. Cities are small, small enough to safeguard the democratic process. And if cities do cooperate, they are big enough to govern at a local scale. And when it comes to health-related issues, which is, I think, a very important topic to all of us, well, nations and even supranations like, for instance, the European Union and other institutions worldwide, they face big problems in fighting against smoking, obesity, mobility, etc. Those are real problems of today. And I think cities are in a very good position to deal with these issues because they are on a smaller scale, they are in direct contact with citizens, and they act local while thinking globally. Cities also have a policy impact. Nations were at stake during the 19th and 20th century, but they created boundaries. Whereas in the 21st century, it will be the century of cities. Cities create bridges. Do you see the difference? Boundaries versus cities. And talking about bridging, linking, well, think, for instance, of the Middle Ages. This still exists, these paths, these pilgrimage routes and itineraries. They link cities by walking or even running, from the north of Europe to the south, to the city of Santiago de Compostela. And most of these paces, of these paths, still exist or are to be rediscovered. Or think about what was Chris already referring to, the Marathon of Istanbul, linking, bridging literally two parts of the city and even two continents. Or the Europa Run, Europa Run, or a rope, because a rope is an instrument that links two cities, for instance, or two places to things, from Paris to Rotterdam, from Hamburg to Rotterdam. Many examples. Or think of this one, the World Run, where people at the very same day, at the very same time, do run all over the world for social purposes. Because they run until they can't for those who can't. Some developments, and here I am with some figures, some data about running. And first of all, of course, I make use of this platform to point your attention to the book, the new book, my colleague and dear friend, Professor Vasil Girgenov, together with Professor Kostas Alexandris, we published a new book on running. It should be of interest to all of you. If you want to have more information, there are flyers around to have more insight into the topic of it. Running events, policies, marketing, and impacts. So for most of the data I will present to you, I will rely on that book, one specific chapter, chapter 2, but also on a book that I presented with other colleagues some years ago on running across Europe. And maybe this is the most important picture, graphic if you want. It's about participating in marathons and the number of marathons. And we may be quite lucky that we have this data. Of course, a marathon is a standardized distance, and it's quite easy to make comparisons. And we have data from the 60s up to present. And what we see is that by means of this data, we can easily discern a first wave and a second wave of running. A first wave starting at the end of the 60s, during the 70s, 80s, to go on, and a second wave starting at the end of the 90s. And there will be a third wave, I will tell about that later on. So we see amazing figures, amazing data about the number of marathons and people participating in it. Also, when we have a close look at the evolution of the number of marathon events with over 1,000 finishers and the number of finishers at the 20 largest marathons, it concerns worldwide data from, again, the 60s up to present. We can see that a first and a second wave can be detected. So a first and a second wave, and I'm not going to go into detail for this table too much, but what you have to keep in mind is that the first wave is about baby boomers. Huh? You know this generation. This generation questioned the established authority systems. So that is why they can be related to the Cultural Revolution. They're called the yuppies. Do you remember? The young urban people living in cities, and then very professional ones, but also like to run on the road for the first time and no longer in stadiums. And the second wave, again starting at the late 90s and continuing at the beginning of the century, is populated or very much liked or created by busters, the baby busters, or the Generation X. Values like diversity, self-reliance, and informality do prevail within this generation. And that is why they can be related to the social revolution. Cities are very much at stake for this generation. They are called joggers, racers, later on. They do like the city, and they participate, they do like the running in so-called light running communities. Chris was already referring to these communities. Well, here you are. I will come back later on with regard to the third wave. But a first wave, a second wave, but of course you can imagine if numbers are increasing in terms of the number of participants and the number of events, that after a while the ratio finishers versus marathon is dwindling. So nowadays no longer more than 600 people are participating on average in a marathon, but it's about 450. This is one of the consequences, of course, of being popular. The supply is there, but of course ratios will follow. Look at this, we are in Asia, we are in Bangkok, and look what the role, the position is of Asia. What I calculated right here is the share of marathon arrivals, and look at this, Asia is on top of it. Almost 40% is in the hands of this continent nowadays when it comes to arrivals at marathons worldwide. Or even the share of marathon events, it's still on the rise, it still has potential, 14%, but it was only 5% at the beginning of the 80s. And there is quite potential in this continent. As we have a look at the population figures, we see that almost 60% of the population, of the world population, lives in Asia, so still potential, demographic potential to go. Also other figures, data from other countries, the US, Japan, for instance, still numbers in terms of participants and events, and also from my country, Belgium, or more precisely, the northern part of it, Flanders. We can detect a first and a second wave. Let's now delve into the profiles of runners. And first of all, and it will not be a secret, but I'm here to present you some figures we have. Well, if we outline the runners according to age and gender characteristics, it's clear that from a study from World Athletics that event runners have never been older. So we are reaching out to an older public. The average age changed from 35 years in '86 to 39 years in 2018. So the age is growing. Females have significantly increased their position. Look at these figures, the graphics I present right here. At the right side, you see for marathon finishers, the evolution of male-female ratios for marathon participation in different countries. And what is worth to mention is that nowadays, for every single female marathon participant, there are only, between brackets, 10 male participants. But you have to know, you have to keep in mind that the situation was totally different many years ago. Or another example, when we look at the numbers of the evolution of the number of female finishers at the Brussels 20-kilometer race. And we have data collected from the beginning of the 80s up to 2022, so very recently. And you see a grow again in the share of female participants. Up to now, 35% of the participants are female. Nevertheless, gender differences still exist. Women do dominate in short distances, meaning less than 5-kilometer races. Men, on the other hand, prevail in longer distances. Older people, females entering this running scene, among others, so it means, has as a consequence, that the average speed is also lowering. Slow, one could say, is the new fast. Yeah? Or, in other words, the fun is in the back of the pack. And I will not go too much into detail with regard to this data, but it means that indeed the speed at events, at running events, is lowering. This is one of the consequences. Of course, also from a practical and organizational perspective, because the race is taking much more time. Data from Antwerp, 10 miles, and Brussels, 20 kilometers. Always the same pattern. It used to be a very fast population running, participating. Nowadays, it's a different picture. So that brings me to the third wave of runners. Nowadays, we have a third wave of running. And this wave is populated, let's say, by bridgers instead of the baby boomers or the baby busters. A long time ago, let's say, nowadays we have the bridgers or the digital natives, the YOLOs they are called. You only live once, it's said. They are raised in a digital, media-saturated world full of physical sensations and experiences, and challenges, of course. And this might be of very much interest to us. However, despite, let's say, the birth of the third wave of running, a democratized pattern is not yet to happen. Look at this. This is one of our scientific results, productions if you want, the so-called social status pyramid of sports participation. According to the social professional status of people participating in sports, we can make a differentiation between different sports. The democratized sports are represented in blue, among others, football and martial arts. They succeed to reach out to different layers, different social layers in society. On top of this pyramid are the upper class sports, among which skiing, golf. At the bottom of the pyramid, the so-called lower class sports are to be situated, among which mountain biking, dance, and also road cycling. And running is to be called a upper middle class sport, still. And this upper middle class generation or population maybe can be better identified as being an active class people for which self-discipline and health, here you are again, are very much at stake. And you see that we have two running figures over there. A black one and a gray one. The black one is to represent the runner who is part of a club, so club-organized running. Whereas the figure in gray is to be called a light runner, so without no obligation, without no affiliation to a certain club. And look what's happening in this pyramid. You noticed already, the figure in gray is much more to be situated as a democratized sports activity. So we reach out to different social layers when people are not affiliated to a sports club. New running segments, so also new motives. What it is about is that people are looking for nice running experiences instead of only striving for individual physical achievements. It's no longer only about the competition-driven athletes and runners, but it is as well and much more about the experience-oriented racers and joggers. And of course, there is the importance of excitement, physically, socially, and socializing. So running has a really strong contribution to social capital, one may say. And this brings me to the importance to the role of so-called light running communities. light running communities in which people participate without any obligation. Almost 60% of the event runners nowadays has no club membership. Maybe during youth time they once participated in athletics, track and field, but nowadays there are no obligations to participate in a club for a year or more. And 65% comes out of our study of the event runners prefer urban running events, cities. Do you remember? Urban running events, city runs, but also urban trails and local joggings. They're on top of the list, followed by more nature-related running events like obstacle runs, for instance, and trails, only reaching out to 30% of the population of event runners. That brings me shortly to almost the end of my presentation, city running events and public value. My dear friend and Professor Jeroen also referred to it, to the issue of public value. When we are talking about public value, it is about public authorities, let's say cities, that have a mandate to promote a healthy lifestyle among their citizens. And this is very important. Well, running events have the potential to contribute, we all know, to health-related and social benefits. So it should not, and it is not only about running for its own or economic sake, but it should be, and it is primarily about running for the greater good. So it is about creating public value, and we do this through the promotion of physical activity, running being one of the most popular physical activities worldwide, as we know, and the contribution to social integration and social cohesion. Those things are at stake nowadays for public authorities, so it should be of importance to you as well. And as a kind of conclusion, the title of my presentation was Making Cities Fit for Runners? ? Well, I'm convinced it is, since cities have the potential to make runners fit and to keep them fit. Nowadays, and I don't have to convince you, but my statement would be that cities do run the world, and the world of runners is 2 cities. I thank you for your attention.
Very much. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Jeroen. Thank you. Thank you.
If there are any questions, please feel free.
Sorry, do you have a conclusion and Q&A? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for an amazing presentation, and indeed, it's a power in the cities. My question is regarding 1960s. You showed some data that was the time when there was the first decline of the first wave. Do you know what happens and how did they manage to overcome the decline of the first wave, and how did they get to second wave? So I'm asking this because, you know, we might need this information to improve our chances of the third wave. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the good question. Well, there is an amazing development from the 60s, 70s towards the 90s, as I tried to identify. Well, in terms of numbers, of course, but also if you have a look at the social characteristics. From the 90s on, females, older people, entered the world of running, and that might cause a shift in terms of motives, but also how you are to organize a running event, of course, because at the time, at the late 60s, at the very beginning of public running, it was about starting at one point and finishing at the other, without taking into account any passion or pleasure elements. I think that's the main difference. That was what we started in the 90s, when we reached out to other peoples. Running may be called one of the most important social movements, among others, for females. Yeah? So that is the shift that took place. New segments, but also new ways of organizing, getting things done in the world of running. Please.
Hi, thank you for that extremely insightful presentation. You mentioned that running events are losing participants to triathlons. Could you give a little bit more detail behind that and as to why that's happening?
Yeah. Well, I'm somewhat an expert in this field because I'm practicing in triathlon nowadays. And the reason why, just on a personal basis, is due to my knees. I'm not a medicine, I'm not an expert in that field, but I know if I keep on running only, that might cause extra problems. And I can imagine for many people, I know from many people in my family and among friends, that this is one of the reasons why they shifted towards another physical activity, but including running. Yeah? And if I refer to the scientific part of it, again, when I have a look at who is participating in triathlon nowadays, most of the participants come from the world of athletics or running, but shifted because of medical reasons, but also because of the passion, because of challenges that may be more included in this new physical activity. So it is not an alarm, it's not to say we should stop running, of course not, but maybe we can pick some cherries from that cake from the world of triathlon. What do I mean? They are experts, although on a lower basis in terms of the numbers they reach out, but they are experts in creating a scene, in having a setting that is very attractive. Well, of course, running, and city running in particular, has this potential as well, but there may be some elements from triathlon that might be of use, that might be of interest to running as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my question is talk about like the authority have to mandate to make the cities fit for runners. Like in that case, like the authority themselves, should they be like into running or sport to make those decisions? Because yesterday there was a discussion, a panel here where they're talking an example like for Vienna, like it's a history like since the 19th century, like the city already know like that history for runners. There are places where it has been there for centuries. Like in the countries in Africa where cities are changing, and then we had as well another panel here where you say like marathon routes are like the people are measuring it, that they are always coming back to change the routes, because I think the cities are changing are not like in Europe where the city is historically being the same. So in the case of Africa, what should be the approach to make those cities fit for runners or for sport in general?
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Rolly, for the good question again. I should say, why not have these obstacles included in your event? No, seriously. Of course, running should be in the hands first of the governing bodies, being World Athletics, being the federations, the national federations, the athletic clubs around. But as we mentioned already many years ago in a publication, we should not miss the next boat of running. This was definitely the case in the 80s. This was definitely the case also in the 90s, that running federations were not concerned with running on the streets. They felt like, yeah, this is not part of the business. I saw it in my country, I saw it in many countries in Europe and around. So it should definitely be kept in the hands of governing bodies, being World Athletics, etc. But, and that was what I tried to mention and then to focus on, public authorities, of course, have an obligation. They do have a mandate, indeed, for taking into account, for being concerned with public health, the health of everyone. Yeah? So the combination of one and one, maybe this doesn't sound too scientific, but one and one could be three, by combining the forces of the world of athletics with the concerns, the profits made or created by authorities, because they have the obligation to be concerned about public health, the health situation of their citizens. So it's about ownership, definitely, but I'm not convinced that the world of running, the governing running bodies, can do it on their own. They need the government, but they should open their eyes more and more, and not here to convince you, but maybe other federations, they should open to a wider public because there is much to gain in this world of running.
All right, Jeroen, I think we are running out of time.
Yep.
But now may I have a big round of applause for Jeroen? And of course...